Hilchos Chametz Umatzah Perek Shmini. The laws of Chametz and Matzah, chapter 8. Yesterday, the Rambam talked about the mitzvahs of the night of Pesach, eating matzah, eating maror, saying the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Today, the Rambam basically repeats most of it, but in order. Like we know, the Seder.
Yeah.
Every Pesach we make a Seder. What does Seder mean? Seder means order, because everything we do in a specific order. So the Rambam, because he's a book of Jewish law, telling you exactly how to live, so he also gives you the order of how to do everything on Pesach night. And we're going to see that there's some differences between the way the Rambam used to do it and the way we do it today. Plus, the Rambam typically describes the Seder the way it was done in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the time of the temple when they had everything proper. They had the Pesach sacrifice. They were able to bring all the proper sacrifices, and so we're going to see a couple of differences between the way they used to do it in temple times and the way we do it today. So, nevertheless, most of it remains very, very similar. And so it's very familiar. As Jews today, we're literally doing the same thing that they used to do in those days. So, here we go, Halacha Aleph. Seder Asiyas Mitzvahs Elu Beleil Chamisha Asar Kachu. The order of doing these mitzvahs, in other words, all these mitzvahs that we discussed in the last few chapters, the order of doing them on the night of the 15th of Nisan goes like this. Batchila, in the beginning, Moizgin Kois L'chol Echad Ve'echad. Every person sitting around the table gets a cup of wine. Umevarech Beirei Pri HaGofen, and you make a blessing. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, Borei Pri HaGofen. V'omer Alav Kiddush Hayoim. You say the Kiddush. It's a holiday, so you make Kiddush. Uzman. Zman means the blessing of Shehecheyanu. Every time we have a holiday, something new, we say Shehecheyanu. V'shoisa, and then you drink the first cup of wine. That we call today Kadesh. That's the first step of the Seder. The Rambam mentioned yesterday that you have to drink this cup leaning to the left. It's one of the obligations of Heseba, of leaning. V'achar kach, then Mivarech al netilas yadayim v'noitel yadav. Then you wash your hands and you make the blessing al netilat yadayim. Now we know today that the second step of the Seder is called urchatz. Urchatz means washing. You wash like you would wash for bread, but you don't make the blessing, right? And that's because what's happening next? The next step is we're going to eat the vegetable dipped in salt water. According to Jewish law, when you dip a vegetable into liquid, you're supposed to wash your hands like you wash for bread. But there is an argument dating back to the Rambam's times whether you should make a blessing on this. The Rambam says you should make a blessing.
On your hands, you mean?
On your hands. The halacha is that we don't. So we today, at present, we don't make a blessing. But the Rambam says you do, because he is of the opinion that even when you wash for a vegetable, you should make a blessing. That's the second step of the Seder. Okay. Next step. Umevi'in Shulchan Aruch. Then they bring a table that's set. Today, we all sit around big tables. But in the olden times, it wasn't customary to do that. Everybody used to have a little table that you would bring with his food or her food on the table. So the Rambam says at this point, after Kiddush and washing, then you bring the table, the small table. The olav marar v'yarak acher. On the table is all the supplies that you need for the Seder. Maror, another vegetable, which we're about to eat now. Umatzah v'charoises, the matzah that we'll need for the Seder. The charosa that we'll need for the Seder. V'gufay shel keves ha'pesach, u'v'sar chagiga shel yom arba'a asar. Plus, the entire sheep or goat that was slaughtered for the Pesach sacrifice, you put that on the table. I actually put a picture of it yesterday. Maybe I can find it here. Yeah, this is a Seder in temple times. See? Everything set around, and a massive sheep is sitting on the table. And you would say the Haggadah with the Korban Pesach in front of you. Plus, there was meat of the Korban Chagiga. The Rambam doesn't say it here, but in the 9th book of the Rambam, when he discusses the laws of the Pesach sacrifice, he tells us that the Pesach sacrifice was eaten at the end of the Seder, but it had to be eaten when you were full. So in order to eat it when you were full, you would bring another sacrifice, so you could have some meat before, and then you would end up eating the Korban Pesach while you were full. So that was called the Chagiga, the celebratory sacrifice. So at the table right now, in the beginning of the Seder, you have all of this stuff. Ubizman hazeh, nowadays, see the Rambam addresses both temple times and nowadays. Nowadays, we don't have any sacrifices, but we do want to remember those sacrifices. Mevi'in al hashulchan shnei minei basar. We put on this table two types of meat. Echad zecher la Pesach ve'echad zecher la Chagiga. One to remember the Passover sacrifice, one to remember the Chagiga sacrifice. Today, our custom is actually not to have two types of meat, but one type of meat and an egg. The shank bone, or some people have a chicken neck bone, and an egg. Those two remember the two sacrifices of Pesach and Chagiga. Okay, so now you have all the supplies in front of you. What do you do next? The next step of the Seder we know as karpas. That's when we dip the vegetable. Maschil, the Rambam says you begin, umevarech borei pri ha'adama. You make the blessing, borei pri ha'adama, v'loikeach yarak. You take the vegetable, and interestingly, the Rambam was all about the charoset. Umetabel oise b'charoses. We dip it in salt water. The Rambam says you dip the vegetable in charoset. V'oichel kazayis, and you should eat an olive-sized portion of the vegetable. Otherwise, it's not called eating. Eating is an olive size. You eat a kazayit. Hu v'chala mesubin ima, you and everybody around the table reclining with you. Kol echad ve'echad ein oichel pachas mikazayis. Every single individual should eat no less than a kazayit. Fascinatingly, today in halacha, we say the opposite. You should only eat less than a kazayit, so you don't get into problems of making an after blessing. But in the Rambam times, he says you should definitely eat a full kazayit, and you still don't have to do a bracha achrona. You don't have to do an after blessing.
What kazayit?
Huh?
Size? What do you say? Size?
An olive size. It's about like an ounce.
Okay.
About an ounce. Okay.
It's a big one.
Huh? Yeah.
It's a big size.
No, today we do.
One, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. A big green olive, exactly. The achar kach, and then oikrin hashulchan milifnei koirei hahagada levadei. We remove the table in front of the person who's reading the Haggadah. Like we said yesterday, we do things that are strange to get kids to ask questions. You just brought the table with all the supplies, now you're taking away the table? What happened? We didn't even eat dinner yet. That's going to get the kid to ask why tonight is different. Umoizgin hakois hasheni, and then you pour the second cup of the 4 cups of wine. V'kan haben shoyel, and here the child asks the questions that we mentioned yesterday. Why is this night different than all other nights? Now, in today's Seder, we have another step that we just skipped. Yachatz, we split the middle matzah and put away the afikoman and etc. But that we're going to see, according to the Rambam, is actually done later. According to the Rambam, you go straight to the next step, which is saying the Haggadah. So it begins with the child asking questions. The oimer hakoire, and the reader also says the questions. Today, that's what we do. The child says the questions, and everybody together also reads the text of the questions. This is one of the sources. The Rebbe used to point to this Rambam as one of the sources for that custom, that everybody, even the adults, should say the Ma'anishtana, because the Rambam says the child asks and the reader recites it. What do we say? So today we know it as the 4 questions, right? Arba kushyot. But the truth is, you'll see in the times of the temple, they used to ask 5 questions according to the Rambam. Ma'anishtana halaylo hazeh mikol halaylos. Why is this night different than all other nights? In 5 ways. First of all, all other nights we don't even dip 1 time, and tonight we're dipping twice: a vegetable, the charoset, the maror. All nights of the year we eat either chametz or matzah, whatever we want. We can eat together even if we want. Today it's all matzah. This is the extra question they asked in temple times. All year round we can eat meat whatever way we want, roasted, stewed, cooked. Today it's all roasted. By the way, the Korban Pesach has to be roasted. That's clear in the Torah. But there was also meat of the Chagiga. The Rambam seems to imply that was also roasted. But the Rebbe explains that it's 2 different types of roasted. One is roasted because it's the mitzvah, and the other one is roasted because tonight's a night of acting freely. And kings, it was customary to roast their meat. So the Korban Pesach we roast because everything was roasted. The Korban because the Pesach it was a mitzvah to be roasted. But the Korban Chagiga was roasted because tonight's a night of acting like kings. And so we do everything like kings do. 4th question. All nights we eat any vegetables we want. Today, bitter vegetables. Final question. All nights, all year round, we eat whether sitting up straight or reclining. Tonight, it's all reclining. Now, this last question is not mentioned in the Talmud. According to many opinions, it was only invented later when people stopped reclining all year round. But the Rebbe says, according to the Rambam, there must have been some version that he had some text, ancient text of the Talmud, where it did have this question, because he wouldn't make stuff up on his own. In times of the temple, they would ask all 5 questions according to the Rambam. Says the Rambam Halacha Gimel, Bazman Hazeh, nowadays, you don't say the 3rd question there about all meat being roasted. She'ein lanu karban, we don't have the sacrifice which is roasted, so it doesn't count. Umaschil bignus v'koirei, And then you begin telling the negative history of the Jewish people. As we said yesterday, we were slaves, we used to serve idols. Ad shegomer drash parshas arami oved avi kula. Until you say the whole Haggadah, you expound the whole portion of Arami Oved Avi, as we talked about yesterday, and you said the Haggadah, the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Then, Dalid umachazir hashulchan lefanav v'omer. You bring the table back with all the stuff on it, and now you talk about all the stuff on the table. V'omer, and you say, first you point to the Korban Pesach, you point to the Passover sacrifice, and you say, Pesach zeh she'anu eichlin, this Passover sacrifice which we eat, al shem shepasach hamakayim al botei avesinu b'mitzrayim, is because God passed over, He skipped over the homes of our fathers in Egypt. Shenemar, as it says, va'amartem zevach pesach hu Hashem, you will tell your children, this is a Passover sacrifice to God, that we commemorate Him saving our parents' homes. Umagbiya hamarar b'yadei v'omer, then you lift the bitter vegetables, and you say, marar zeh she'anu eichlin, this marar which we eat, al shem shemereru hamitzriyim eschaya v'sinu b'mitzrayim, is because the Egyptians embittered the lives of our ancestors in Egypt. Shenemar, as it says, v'yemareru eschayayim, they embittered their lives. Umagbiya hamatzah b'yadei v'omer, and then you lift up the matzah in your hands and you say, matzah zu she'anu eichlin, why do we eat this matzah? Al shem shaloi hispik b'tzeikom shalavesinu lahachmitz, because our ancestors' dough didn't have time to rise, didn't have time to become leaven. Ad shenigla aleim HaKadosh Baruch Hu u'ga'olam miyad, until Hashem, by the time Hashem revealed Himself upon them and redeemed them right away. Shenemar, as it says, vayofu es habotzek asher yitziu mimitzrayim b'chulei, the Jews baked the bread, the dough which they brought out from Egypt. They didn't have time. It turned into matzah. It couldn't become chametz. Now today, many have the custom not to pick up the items, but to just touch them. And of course, ubazman hazeh, nowadays, oimer, you don't say this Pesach. There's no Korban Pesach. You say Pesach shehayu aviseinu eichlin bizman shebeis hamikdash kayam, the Pesach that our ancestors used to eat in the time of the temple, al shem shepasach HaKadosh Baruch Hu al batei aviseinu v'chulei, is because Hashem skipped over the homes of our fathers, etc. You say the same text, but instead of describing it as here, present in front of you, you say they used to eat it. Hey, v'oimer, then you say, Lefichach, therefore, because Hashem did all these great miracles to us, therefore, anu chayavin, we are obligated lehoidos, lehalel, leshabeach, to thank, to praise, to laud, lefayer, lehader, leroimim, to glorify, to adore, to exalt, legadelu, lenatseach, to magnify and to give honor, lemisha asa la'avisenu v'lanu es kol anisim ha'elu, to the one, to Hashem, who did for our ancestors and for us all of these miracles. Vayitzianu mi'avdos lecheros, it took us out from servitude to freedom, from sorrow to happiness, from darkness to a great light. And let us say before Him Hallelujah, and then we recite the first two paragraphs of Hallel. Hallelujah, Hallelujah Avdei Hashem v'gomer ad chalamish l'mayim ne'mayim, till the end of the B'tzet Yisrael Mitzrayim paragraph. And then you conclude with the following blessing: Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe. Asher ge'alanu v'galas habeseinu miMitzrayim, that you redeemed us and you redeemed our ancestors from Egypt. And you allowed us to reach this night to eat matzah and maror. Thank you, Hashem, for redeeming us. Thank you, Hashem, for giving us the mitzvahs. That was how they used to say it in temple times. Nowadays, you add another wish. Cain, so too, just like Hashem redeemed us in Egypt, so too Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu, so too God, our God and the God of our ancestors, Yagienu l'moyadim v'lirgalim acherim, Habayim likraseinu l'shalem. Hashem should allow us to reach other holidays, other festivals that are coming up towards us in peace. Smeichim b'vinyan irecha v'sasim ba'avodasecha. We should be happy with the rebuilding of your city and rejoicing with your service. V'noichal sham min azvachim u'min apsachim, and we will eat there in the Bet HaMikdash from the sacrifices, from the Pesach sacrifices. Sheyagia damam al kir mizbachacha l'ratzin, where their blood will reach the wall of your mizbeach for goodwill. We will then thank you with a new song for our redemption and for the redemption of our souls. Baruch atah Hashem, Ga'al Yisrael, blessed are you, God, who redeemed Israel. Of the second cup, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Borei Pri Hagafen, and you drink the second cup, again, leaning to the left. Vav, what's after you say the Haggadah? You wash your hands again. Then you make the blessing and you wash your hands again. By the way, notice the Rambam says, also before, I didn't point it out earlier, but he says you make the blessing first, then you wash. Because usually that's how we do it. We make blessings and then we do mitzvahs. According to halacha today, this is one of the only mitzvahs where we make the blessing after the mitzvah. But according to the Rambam, we make the blessing before the washing. You wash your hands a second time. Why do you wash your hands a second time? Because you diverted your mind. When you read the Haggadah, you got distracted. You didn't necessarily keep your hands clean, so you wash again. The Rambam says you only take 2 matzot. We know today we have 3 matzot. The Rambam's opinion was you only have to have 2. Why? Because you need lechem mishnah. You need double bread. Like on Shabbat you have 2 chalot. On Pesach you have 2 matzot. And here is where you do yachatz. V'chaylek echad mehen. Here, before you make the blessing hamotzi, you split 1 matzah in half. Umaniach paros l'soich shalem. And you put the broken matzah inside the whole one. Today it's kind of hard to do that because the matzahs are flat. But in Yemenite, in olden days, they used to have soft lafa matzahs. So you could actually fold the whole matzah and put the broken one inside the whole one. And you make a blessing. Thank you, Hashem, for bringing out the bread from the earth. Now, that means you're only making a blessing on 1.5 loaves. Why don't you make a blessing over 2 full loaves, 2 full matzahs like every other holiday? Mishum shenemar, because it says lechem oini. The matzah has to be poor bread. Ma darka shel oni biprusa, afkan biprusa. The same way a poor man usually eats broken bread, he can't afford whole bread, so we also have broken bread. Now in today's custom, we do both. We have 3 matzot. We break 1 in half in the middle of the Seder. So we have the poor man's bread there. And then when it comes hamotzi, we have 2 full matzot. So you can do both. Then, koyrech matzah u'maror ke'echos. Now the Rambam again is talking about temple times. Today we first have matzah, then we have maror, then we do a sandwich, right? In the Rambam's times, in the temple times, the mitzvah was to have a sandwich, the way the Rambam sees the halacha. So you make a sandwich of matzah and maror together. Okay, here I only have matzah, and then I have maror. But let's imagine that there was a sandwich. Umetabel b'charosis, and you dip it in the charoset. Umevarech, and you say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvaso v'tzivanu. Thank you, Hashem, or blessed are you, Hashem, for commanding us with the mitzvah of al achilas matzois umeroirim. It's one big blessing. Hashem commanded us to eat matzah and maror together, v'oichlan, and then you eat them. If you ate matzah alone and maror alone, you make a blessing on each one, even in temple times. But ideally, you should make a sandwich. And then we have the part of the Seder, which we don't do anymore today. Then you eat the meat, the sacrificial meat. Mevarech, you make a blessing as follows. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvaso v'tzivanu al achilas hazevach. Blessed are you, God, King of the universe. He sanctified us with His mitzvahs. He commanded us to eat the sacrifice. And then you eat from the meat of the chagigah, the celebratory sacrifice that's there to get you full, so you could eat the korban pesach when you're full. Then you make a second blessing. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvaso v'tzivanu al achilas hapesach, or hapasach. Blessed are you, God, King of the universe. Sanctified us with your mitzvahs. You commanded us to eat the korban pesach. V'oichel migufay shel pesach, and you eat some of the body of the korban pesach because the whole body was sitting there in front of you. Now, the Rambam says we usually don't make 2 blessings if we don't need to. You're sitting here right here with 2 pieces of meat. Maybe make 1 blessing. So the Rambam explains, V'loi birkas ha-pesach preteres shel zevach, v'loi shel zevach preteres shel pesach. Each one stands on its own. The blessing on one can't exempt the other. So you cannot make less than 2 blessings. You have to make 1 blessing on each one. Ches, bizman hazeh she'ein sham karba. Nowadays, we don't have a sacrifice. So what do? How do we do the Seder? So the Rambam says, Achar shemevarech hamotzi lechem. Once you make the blessing of hamotzi lechem min haaretz, you don't eat the matzah right away. Chayzer umevarech al achilas matzah. You go make another blessing, just about the matzah. Hashem has commanded us to eat matzah. Umetabil matzah b'charoises. According to the Rambam, you dip the matzah alone into the charoset and you eat it. Talk about that in a second. Then you take the bitter herbs and you make a blessing on that. It's a rabbinic blessing, it's not a mitzvah biblically, but you make a blessing. Hashem commanded us to eat the maror. Dip the maror also in the charoset and you eat it. Don't keep it too long in the charoset. Perhaps you'll lose the taste, the bitter taste. And that's a mitzvah rabbinically. Then you go back and you wrap the matzah and the maror together, you make the sandwich. Says you dip that also in the charoset. And you eat them without a blessing as a remembrance for the Holy Temple times where they used to do the sandwich. Now the Ravid, who's the primary commentator on the Rambam, he says, Zeh hevel. It's emptiness to say that you would dip the matzah in the charoset. Maror in the charoset, sure. Matzah in the charoset, he says hevel. It's vanity. It's a big discussion why the Rambam says to dip matzah in the charoset. The Rogachover Gaon, who lived in the times of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe in the last century, he has a comment over here. The Rebbe also explained it at length. Matzah celebrates freedom. Maror and charoset celebrates slavery. So the Ravid says, nowadays, when we don't have freedom in its fullest sense, so we can't mix freedom and slavery. Maror and charoset, that goes together. They're both ways to remember the slavery. Matzah and charoset, they have no place. The Rambam says we can live in temple times, like when everything was together, the freedom and the slavery came together, the matzah and the maror were eaten together. You could dip the matzah in the charoset. The Ravid says, Zeh hevel, it's emptiness. Hevel doesn't just mean bad. Hevel means it doesn't have content. If you would try to dip the matzah in the charoset, it wouldn't work nowadays. It works in Mashiach times or in temple times. Tes ve'achar kach nimshach baseuda. Then you get involved in your meal. After you had the matzah and you had the maror, and in temple times you had the korban pesach, then you eat the meal. Ve'oichel kol ma shoretz alechel, v'shoisa kol ma shoretz alishtois. You eat whatever you want to eat. You drink whatever you want to drink. Uba'acharena. Make sure that at the end of the meal, in temple times, oichel mi b'sara pesach, you should have something, some meat of the Passover sacrifice. Afilu kazayis, even a small olive sized. Ve'ene toyim acharav klal, and you don't eat anything after it. Ubazman hazeh, today we don't have the korban pesach, so what do? We eat the afikomen. Oichel kazayis matzah, ve'ene toyim acharav klum. You eat an olive size of matzah without tasting anything after it. Kadesh yeh hefsek suudasei. So you should stop the meal, the tam besara pesach matzah befiv, with the taste of the meat of the sacrifice of the pesach or the matzah still in your mouth. Sha'achilasan hi ha-mitzvah, because eating them is the mitzvah. Then after you eat the meal, va'achar kach neitel yodav u'mevarich birkas hamazon, you wash your hands. This is like the mayim acharonim, fingertips, and you make birkat hamazon, third cup of wine, al kais shlishi, on the third cup v'shoseyo, when you drink it. Va'achar kach meizeh kais revi. Then you pour a fourth cup. The Geimer Allah v'sahalal, and you conclude the halal on this cup. V'oimer Allah birkas hashir. You also say the blessing of the song. V'hi b'yahalalucha Hashem kol ma'asecha v'chulei, which is the last paragraph of Hallel as we know it today. Yahalalucha. U'mevarich b'rei pri hagafen, and you make the blessing b'rei pri hagafen. Drink the fourth cup, leaning to the left. V'einoi toyim achar kach klum kol halayla chutz min hamayim, and you don't taste anything after it all night except for water. V'yesh loy limzoi kais chamishi. It's permissible, or a person should pour, mix, dilute a fifth cup, v'loymar alav halel hagadol, and to recite the great Hallel over it. What's the great Hallel? What we say every Shabbos morning. Ha'idul Hashem ki tov, ki le'olam chasdo, yeah? Ha'idul Hashem ki tov, ad al nares bavel. Chapter 136 of Psalms. Because this cup isn't obligatory like any of the other four cups. You can just pour. You can just have this fifth cup. The commentaries discuss this at length. The Rebbe says, if you look at the Rambam, he doesn't say drink it. He says just pour it. You can pour a fifth cup, and it can be there. You don't drink it. Some people connect it to Elijah's cup. You know, we have the fifth cup. It's not exactly, but definitely maybe homiletically connected. And you can conclude the Hallel wherever you want, even if it isn't the place where you ate. You don't have to say the final part of the Seder where you ate. Matter of fact, in today's day and age, it's very common for students to go to their teachers' homes for the end of the Seder. In the Rebbe's times, when he would make a Seder in his parents-in-law's private apartment, so only a few people were invited for the beginning, but then at the end, for Hallel, everybody can come inside and they would conclude their Seder there. Yud Aleph. Okay, that concludes the order of the Pesach Seder. Now the Rambam says some side halachot that relate to the Seder night. Mokim shenagu lechel tzali b'leil psachim. If it's a place where the custom is to eat roast meat on the nights of Pesach, oichlim they can eat. Mokim shenagu shaloi lechel ein oichlin. But there are other communities who don't eat roast meat on Pesach night. As a matter of fact, that we do that as well. Gzeir Hashem lo yomru b'sar Pesachu. As a decree, we don't want people to think that we're eating a korban Pesach outside of the temple. Uv'chol mokim. But either way, no matter where you live, asur lechel set solui kuloi ke'echad b'leil zeh. You definitely cannot roast an entire sheep and bring the body of the sheep to the meal. That literally looks like you're eating kodashim, holy sacrifices outside the temple. You can bring cuts of meat, pieces of roast meat, but a whole sheep, definitely not. If it was cut up, or you took off one limb, or you boiled one of the limbs, you didn't roast it while it's attached to the body, that's allowed in the place where anyway they would eat roast meat. Yud Beis. Thank God we don't have this situation today. We are blessed to have an abundance of wine and matzah. But what if a person ends up in a place or a time where he has no wine on the Seder night? So you're missing the 4 cups, of course. But what do? You should make kiddush over the matzah, as you would do on Shabbos if you had no wine. Otherwise, you follow the whole procedure, the order, just do it with matzah.
Water or something?
No.
Liquid? No.
On Pesach, either wine or matzah. What if a person only has one type of vegetable, a bitter herb vegetable? In the Seder, we saw you have to eat a vegetable in the beginning, a regular vegetable, and then the maror later. What if you only have the maror? Says the Rambam, way in the beginning of the Seder, take the maror and make 2 blessings on it. Then you eat it. When you finish the Haggadah and it's time to eat maror again, make a blessing over the matzah and eat it. Eat again from the maror, because that's the time of the Seder, but don't make a blessing, because you already made a blessing earlier in the Seder. Yud Gimel, Misha Ein Matzah Mishumeres Ela Kazayis. If a person has a lot of matzah, but matzah shmura, the guarded matzah, that's proper matzah for the Pesach Seder, he only has enough for 1 kazayit, 1 olive sized. So what you should do is only when you conclude your meal, after eating all the non-guarded, non-shmura matzah, then at the end, mevarich al achilas matzah v'oichel oisei kazayis, make the blessing over the mitzvah of eating matzah, eat that kazayit of matzah shmura, ve'einei toyem acharav klum, and don't taste anything after. In other words, the Rambam is saying, better eat the kazayit of matzah shmura for afikomen than eat it for the original matzah. Use something else for the original matzah, eat the proper matzah for the afikomen. Yudalit. Misha yashin b'soicha seuda v'heketz. If somebody falls asleep during the meal and he wakes up, einei chayzer v'oichel, he cannot resume eating. In temple times, when you had the Korban Pesach, one of the mitzvahs was to eat it bebayit echad, in one home. You can't move homes in the middle. So just like back then, if you would fall asleep, it's like going into a different home. So today also, if you fall asleep during the Seder, it's like going into a different home, and you have to wash again, or you can't just continue eating. B'nei chabura, that's if you're alone. If you're members of a group, everyone's sitting around the table together making a Seder. If some of them fall asleep during the meal, they can go back and eat, no problem, because the rest of the group is still up. If they all fell into a deep sleep and then they woke up, they should not eat. But if they all just dozed off, still half up, then they can continue to eat, because they never fully fell asleep, so they're still considered to be in the same group.